Well, I'm sitting in the Novitiate conference room here up on the top floor of the monastery, and this room is where novices and junior monks gather for their classes every day with the Novice Master or somebody else. As Novice Master, I meet up with Brother Hugh, our novice, 3 times a day. At the end of the morning, we have our class, and at the moment we're studying, as could be expected, the Rule of St Benedict. Well, the Rule of St Benedict is the guide for Benedictine monks and nuns right across the world. In fact, many other religious orders and lay movements have adopted the Rule of St Benedict. I should just add that at the heart of our lives is the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. So who was St Benedict? Benedict was born in Norcia in central Italy in the year 480 and died at Monte Cassino in 547. He was a student in Rome, but left as he was disturbed by the life that he encountered there. He then fled to a cave at Subiaco, where he was a hermit for 3 years. And we learn something about Benedict from the dialogues of St Gregory the Great, who tells us that during his time in the cave at Subiaco, he received the monastic habit from a monk called Romanus. There's a story that he was so wrapped up in prayer that one Easter Sunday, Benedict didn't actually realize it was Easter Sunday. Well, from that cave at Subiaco, Benedict went on to found 12 communities and established the monastery at Monte Cassino, where he died and where he wrote his Rule for Beginners, as he called it. I said that he wrote a rule for monks. In fact, Benedict pieced together parts from other monastic rules. His principal source was the Rule of the Master. Benedict's genius was his ability of putting together a balanced and sensible rule for men living in a community under a rule and an abbot. So let's have a brief look at the prologue, where Benedict outlines for us the main themes he develops in this little book. He opens with the simple word, listen. At one level, that is a simple word. But we all know listening is in fact one of the hardest things to engage in. And why is listening so hard? Listening is hard because we have to let go of everything. We have to concentrate our minds and hearts and allow the Holy Spirit to fill us with his loving presence. This requires effort, real effort. But this kind of deep listening is what prayer is all about. It is the listening we bring to the times when we gather as a community to pray in the church. It is the listening we adopt to the times when we gather not only as a community to pray, but in moments of quiet, personal prayer. It's the listening that's required when we engage in Lectio Divina, that is, the prayerful reading and meditation of the Scriptures. And we shouldn't forget, it's the listening that we should try and exercise in our relationships with the brethren. In the prologue, St Benedict tells the monk that he must arm himself with the strong weapons of obedience. In fact, St Benedict has a specific chapter on obedience. But throughout the rule, the monk is reminded and exhorted of the importance of listening, as we will see specifically in chapter 3, calling the brethren to counsel, and chapter 31, the celera of the monastery. So, as we begin any work, we must pray and ask God that whatever task we're engaged in, it must be brought to perfection with his help. And slowly, as the prologue unfolds, St Benedict urges us to have the gospel for our guide, always to speak the truth from our hearts, and not to practice deceit with the tongue. We should try and live our lives in the presence of God, reaching out to others with good deeds. And St Benedict concludes the prologue by saying that if this requires a certain strictness, do not be daunted and run away. By slowly sticking at it, persevering, the Lord will lead and guide us to himself and fill our hearts with his love. This little rule of St Benedict is a rule for the Cenobites, and that is monks living in a monastery under a rule and an abbot. And Benedict knows that openness amongst the brethren is necessary if a strong and vibrant community is to exist. And so he exhorts the abbot to call the community together, particularly at times when matters of importance need to be discussed. And this short chapter, we see the wisdom of Benedict shining. The abbot must place before the community what needs to be discussed and thought about. But he must hear the advice of all the brethren and ponder over that advice before he makes a decision. And all the brethren are to take part in the discussion. And particular note is to be taken of what the younger members have to say. Opinions are to be expressed with humility and must not be defended obstinately. But the final decision rests with the abbot. But at the same time, matters must be settled with fairness. One of the key officials for St Benedict in the monastery is the man called the celera. And this is the monk who St Benedict actually calls a father to the community. He is the man who has charge of the temporalities of the monastery. The monks turn to him for a number of their needs. The celera has to see that the monks are fed. And this chapter opens with a sort of job description. What Benedict wants to see in the person who is the celera is wisdom, maturity, that he shouldn't be proud, wasteful, dilatory, not a great eater, and temperate. The celera, of course, is going to have to deal with the brethren all the time. So he's got to show patience, even when under pressure, which he certainly will be, and when unreasonable demands are made. And at times he's going to have to refuse requests, but he's got to do this kindly. St Benedict says he will have to offer a kind word in reply. He's got to show particular care to the sick, children, guests, and the poor. And St Benedict reminds the cellarer that everything that he has in his charge, all the goods, should be treated as if they were vessels of the altar. So St Benedict gives us a picture really of what he would like the mature monk to be like: caring, thoughtful, wise, and above all, someone who is prepared to listen. He also says someone who is God-fearing, and by that he means someone who is living in the presence of God. So in these chapters, we see how important it is for all in the monastery to learn the art of listening. Listening to the voice of God in one's heart and allowing that voice, that sweet love of God, to fill one's heart and mind. At the same time, we're called to live in community and listen to one another and exercise patience, love, and understanding. And so, as we all live through these difficult days, when all of us are being asked to stay at home in order to prevent the spread of the virus, we need to exercise the patience and the wisdom that St Benedict outlines for us. We're all being asked to listen with our hearts and show compassion towards our brothers and sisters at home, our neighbour in our country, and in the world. In St Benedict's own words, no one is to pursue what he judges best for himself, but instead what he judges better for someone else.